So, hey, welcome back, KGBs, to another Bros Being Kinder, gentler in the community. If you're new to this, because we have on a very kind, gentle bro today, my friend Addison Shock. The point of this segment is that through this work, I found a ton of guys reaching out to me who are doing great stuff for mental health in the community. I want to feature them. It's been a lot of fun so far. Addison, thanks for joining.
Good to be here. Thank
Yeah,
you, brother.
Addison, just our connection is that he reached out over Instagram about this is cool. We vibed out and we're already making plans to ski together this winter in Colorado. Addison is not in Colorado here with me. He actually splits time between Costa Rica and Birmingham, Alabama. That's right, because his life fucking rocks. Addison grew up in Meridian, Mississippi. It's actually on the eastern side of Mississippi, so think closer to Birmingham and Tuscaloosa, though he went to undergrad in Stark Vegas in Mississippi State. He is, unfortunately, as those boys tend to be, loyal to the SEC, generally speaking. He's a Cowboys fan because of Dak and a Memphis Grizzlies fan. So, as a guy who splits time between liking outdoorsy stuff, he is a surfer, rock climber, fly fisher, and a hooper. You can't tell while he's sitting down, Addison is actually a very tall bronze god. And so, Addison, in his actual time, Addison is a therapist turned men's life coach. And we're very excited today to just talk about Addison's work and then spiral that into conversations about men, masculinity, and cultural considerations around men's mental health. Addison, tell us your story.
It's good to be here first.
Thanks, brother. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll start. I was born in Jackson, Tennessee. Now, I grew up in Mississippi, public school kid, played high-level sports like football and basketball, lost 2 state championships in the same calendar year. Football my junior year, basketball my senior year, or excuse me, reverse that. And loved playing sports. I would say that one of the reasons I really loved playing sports was the diversity that it kind of put me in. Like in Mississippi, I was mainly with folks of color all the time. That was where I spent my time and loved it, playing high level sports. Went to Mississippi State for undergrad, and then did a lot of my career path has done a lot of bouncing around from. I've worked in nonprofit world for a long time. And part of what got me into this work was I was working with people on staffs that I had, and I was always managing and directing. And I would find myself sitting in front of staff members for hours at a time. And it was the life-giving part of the work to me was helping them sort out what was going on. And so
you were a therapist before you were a therapist?
Well, yeah, went and did my master's at Vanderbilt and was able to, in the state of Tennessee, do counseling individuals, couples, and then have pivoted to doing work specifically with men, doing this in a life coaching format, which is, I admittedly have had and still at times have a lot of judgment towards, but also know that the work that I'm doing is good. And I know that because I got off a call right before we were here, and it's supporting people. And so,
Absolutely.
And particularly just men.
Yeah, Addison and I were just talking about how the pros of many life coaches and also the challenges of not having a regulated field, right? And, it's all therapeutic relationships, Addison. We highlighted the multiple types of therapists a few weeks ago on the Male Therapist Roundtable, and therapeutic relationships come in all forms, mentorship, coaches, teachers, therapists, psychiatrists, whatever. And so the reason that I think sometimes I get rubbed the wrong way by it is that people are coming to you as a life coach or a therapist with a lot of they're bringing a lot of responsibility to you.
Absolutely.
And most life coaches take that responsibility very seriously. The question is, do they know what to do? Are they doing the right things? Are they doing it healthily? And again, we've emphasized this on the show. Any therapist needs to be in their own therapy and handling their own stuff.
Yeah.
And my worry is if you haven't had the right training, then you're less likely to have that shit under control. So that's no shot at life coaches. If any of you want to come to me and tell me all about how qualified you are, fine. Because I got Addison here. This is my fucking dude. I have every ounce of faith in him. It's been great getting to know him. I'm sure he's good with his people. So sweeping generalizations aren't cool.
Sure.
We're just, kind of talking it out.
I would say this is a skill that I really believe in and have really honed in myself. If it even remotely feels like the client that I'm sitting in front of, they have needs that are beyond my scope, I immediately source them to somebody else.
Yeah.
And that's a part of within my own integrity in this work, where I have a referral system set up where I'm finding that also, maybe because the word therapist can be, particularly in the South, can be like a big step for somebody, but to see a life coach is maybe a little bit more approachable at times, not for everybody.
Yeah, sure.
And so it's a way to get people into the work. And then if they need something more than what I can offer, then I pass them along. And I try and make sure I'm very clear in exactly what I can offer.
What are the kinds of, because
Yeah.
I was curious to ask you, what had you shed the label and why? Like the therapist label necessarily, you know, and I'm curious because talking with Addison, it'll be very clear as we all listen that he retains the vibe and the information and the strategies and the things he learned. But why shed it? But also maybe before the why shed it, like what are those things that people bring to you that you don't feel like you should touch upon, or maybe is out of your wheelhouse?
Yeah, if there's any, if it's anything that I can like see in the realm of this is a diagnosis that is beyond me. So if there's anything with, even if my spider senses start to go off around any type of personality disorder or anything like that is even remotely there, and again, a lot of this is like having a sense of people that's like, there's something here, and I don't want to dig too much into this because I don't want to open something up that then I'm not set up to. We don't have the relationship to be able to
is
work
it
with.
Safety that concerns you around personality disorder?
I mean, that's a huge piece of it, right?
Yeah,
and
totally.
And I'm really clear about what I do as well. And so like I send a full form that is like, this is not mental health therapy. This is where you need to go if that's what you need. Like, and so much of the work that I'm doing is working with goals, working with values. Yes, like working with anxiety, working with like so many emotions, right? Working with anger, working with shame, so many of those things. And I'm using a lot of, what's interesting in the life coaching world right now is there's so many incredible theories and modalities that are being now translated into coaching language, which still keeps it like safe and keeps the relationship safe, but is using the goodness of all of these different modalities that are helping people.
I think more and more. I just had on another guy who reached out via the socials, this guy, Jason, who, if you're listening to this, you'll have already heard Jason's interview. And it was amazing. Like, he used this term shadow work, which is essentially the same exact thing as psychodynamic therapy, right?
Yep.
So like, it's, as long as I get the feeling that the work is founded in stable principles, I don't give a fuck what you call it, right? And that's the whole idea of not being like judgmental, which, look, I grew up judgmental like anybody. I've pitched on this podcast being curious and not judgmental. I got to tell myself that too. So you hear shadow work and you're like, oh, what's this fucking guy selling? And then you're like, oh, wait, he just means of like working on what's in the shadows and isn't like right out in front of us, He just, So I think that's great. And the idea there is, this, Addison, I know this. If we take away the term personality disorder, which implies you either have one or you don't, and you lay all those features out on a spectrum, you cannot avoid working with personality problems. That is what we all have. So there's a normalization. And then, so that's why I internalized, like, if somebody's going to have problems with suicidality, self-harm, really bad substance use, other maladaptive, scary behaviors, that's your way of saying, look, I can't take on that liability. I don't have, like, I might be in Costa Rica and you're in fucking New York City. So what am I going to do about it when you're saying, that makes sense. And for people to hear, like, that's not that uncommon for mental health practitioners in general to punt, right? If you have that level of safety concern, this might not just be like a random thought or things that come every so often. Real deal, high level amounts of safety concerns truly do need to be handled in person and with somebody who's skilled at that stuff. So I appreciate that, Addison, not judgment, like it's about safety.
Yeah. Something I also do is, if people have, like, if we're going to work in this space, obviously they opt into this, but I want to know their history as much as they're willing to tell me with therapy. And I also would like to know as much as I can so that I kind of know what we're working with. Because people come to me, it's like, I'll have people that come to me right after they've worked with a therapist for a year and a half, and now they want to move into this next phase. And so I like to have the framework of like, okay, what are we working with? Just so I'm aware of it. The more information I have, the more responsible I can be. and then we can start to move towards what's next.
Your history, like what you've done, is going to have you gather, I'd imagine, a pretty therapist type history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whether, whether it feels like that or not, just those kinds of questions is probably ingrained in you. I mean, I don't think I could shake it. Like the way I ask questions and stuff, I've done it 20,000 times. I don't know, some number that makes it hard to break that. Like you said, values, what are some of the things that you think you notice in men? Just trends you've seen, things you take away from good sessions? Like, what's the stuff you like to see?
One of the biggest things that I work with is emotional capacity and really helping men get comfortable within the sometimes uncomfortability of their own emotions. And I'm as practical as they come in. I like the theoretical stuff, but I'm like, okay, you're about to get off this call and you're about to have a conversation with your partner. And likely that's going to be a conversation that is maybe about the trash, and you're probably going to get in a fight about it.
Yeah,
so
right.
Let's break that down. That's the area where I feel like I can be most helpful. And, but yeah, so like helping them get comfortable with emotional capacity. I do work with anger. And I mean, we spoke about this previously too, but like anger being one of the only socially acceptable emotions that men can express, and working with shame, like all of these different things kind of evolving. And then the way that I bridge this is like, okay, these are creating patterns in your life that are clearly not good for you and not good for the people around you. And so we approach this on a lot of different angles. It's like, let's reverse these patterns and then see how that shifts within the emotions. Let's address the emotions and what's there, and then how that can shift your patterns. So I'm coming at it from a lot of different angles, but.
And again, that's so good. Like my perception, and this is what I'm learning, is when I talk to my patients about like, look, I'm your therapist, I'm not your life coach. I say that because it's like, I feel like when I start shifting into like, let's make a daily schedule, let's set goals. And it's like, that is also what therapists do. But it's like, you don't know whether that's what the patient's looking for. And for you, I like that you're like, no, I'm not just like teaching guys to exercise and like eat cleanly, right? Like I'm doing those kinds of concepts are all therapy concepts. I'm curious for you with men specifically, when you shifted your title from therapist to life coach or to men's coach, did you notice a shift in who was coming to you, who was seeking your services, or even more, their willingness to change?
That's a great question.
Because I
would say when I went from the counseling space, like individual couples, like and have pivoted to specifically like the big difference, just men, right? I would say that people come to me with more specific problems, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
People come to me with more specific problems, which is honestly, I love, because it gives us like a really clear target to aim at. And then what's cool though is what happens is we're able to unpack the things that are causing those problems, which is like the help they needed to begin with. But the thing that pushed them to actually get that support was a specific issue. And so I'm always like, I get excited because I'm like, okay, we're going to help support the specific problem, but this is a pattern that has been happening since you were a kid. And how can we unpack this and then help you move forward in all aspects of your life?
It makes like, because I was talking about like the willingness to change, and I think if you come with a self-identified problem, that shows that your defenses around said problem are probably closer to being down than if you come and you say, for example, hey doc, I'm depressed or I'm anxious. That probably means you don't have the language or the acceptance yet of, right, I feel terrible and I meet criteria for depression. Also, the specific problem is I can't advocate for myself at work. I'm too embarrassed and shameful to get a divorce that I need. I feel bad about my weight and I can't establish healthy habits, whatever all that stuff is. So I think the more language you have around what's the core of causing the problem, well, then you're probably just closer to the finish line, which is, I think, great. And I think what's nice is what you're saying is just because you're closer to the finish line doesn't mean that there are not deep, dark issues to work on.
Yeah.
It's just how everybody is. I mean, some people are blessed with their childhoods being terrible and they present pretty well and function pretty well. And other people mostly had their needs met and they're a total goddamn mess. So it's like, we don't know, like,
Mm-hmm.
people are complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and isn't it, and I think I'm always struck by like how, when you break everything down and peel back the layers, it's like, of course, people are incredibly complex, but also like incredibly simple. And we're all like looking for the same things. And there's many different ways to say a lot of different things. I mean, you see that all the time in your work, right? It's like, and we just talked about it, we can put language that it's all saying the same thing, but so many of the problems are all the same, right? Like we're all experiencing pain on some level in like as humans. So yeah. And I think also part of the shift for me as a coach was like coaching. Like I feel like I naturally am inclined to be somebody who like, I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to care about you deeply. I'm going to pull for you as hard as I possibly can to succeed. I'm going to root for you. And I'm going to be there for you. And my goal is to push you and pull you and all, like in all the ways that I can. And I don't know, I like that. I like that framework.
And it's interesting because hearing you say that is all the parts about my job I like. And any of my patients listening, and I have patients who listen to the show who are going to be like, let me tell you, if anybody in my life is honest with me, it's Dr. Solomon, right? And so that stuff is what gets therapists jazzed up. And then that's like a functioning level, right? Like who can you push and who can you not push is based on how ready they are to hear that stuff. And so for the most part, I also get people who are like that. And also I have people who are certainly not, and that's the hard part of being a psychiatrist, especially like I have when you've worked like in the hospitals and where people are really not having a good time. They're not necessarily ready to hear some of the things and have, they're just stuck in whatever it is. So I think that's cool. Like I everybody listen, like I heard Addison, Addison and I talked about this a few weeks ago when we first met. I was like, I'm kind of jealous, man. Like I love being a doctor. And I think if anybody listens to this show, they know how seriously I take that responsibility. And Addison and I were supposed to meet last week and I had to cancel because I had a patient who was acutely suicidal. We had to do a welfare check. And I missed the time and I would not have been functionally able to meet anyway. Right. Just all sorts of fucked up over here. So like, that is the thing that like the higher you go in the therapy ladder as to like a psychiatrist, you're dealing with that kind of stuff and it's exhausting. It's different than, again, I get the draw of wanting to be like, hey, I'm not like, I can't handle that stuff. It would increase your job satisfaction, all that stuff. Like totally. So hence everybody, if we go back in the time machine, we can all use these DBT skills. We can all handle our big distress moments. We can learn it. We can do better. Had to make sure there was a positive spin there, Addison. So a lot of what I want to talk, Addison and I've already talked about this. It feels like ad nauseum as we became friends, but Addison grew up in the South. Okay. And what I would call the deep South being, and he said he's from all over the South, spent time in Tennessee and Mississippi and Alabama. And I'm from the Midwest. I would love, Addison, to say to you that I think the mental health resources in Ohio are much greater than in the deep South. Maybe, but it's not impressive, right? But even then, I wanted to talk about what you feel like things in the South and how those specific cultural considerations impacts mental health, how you saw it, how you see. I mean, that's still where you live half the time.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and particularly for men, this is part of the reason I'm in this work is there's not a lot of resources. And what I mean by that is there are not a lot of kind of like attainable resources. And so a lot of men particularly just suffer in silence. And it's like, you shut your mouth, you shut yourself down, and you go to work. And then you end up in a relationship where you're emotionally distant. And there's just like all these things that follow. You're emotionally distant from your kids, like all these different levels. And so, and yeah, it's because it's very much a culture. It's a culture that I do want to say I love and I really appreciate. There were times in my life when I didn't, but then I matured and grew up a little bit and was able to see the good for what it was and also kind of leave
I mean, you wouldn't nobody's holding you to living in Birmingham.
Yeah.
Like your choice.
And so leave the things that aren't as great. I can see them for what they are and I'm okay with that. Yeah. It's very much a, like, you shut your mouth, put your boots on, go to work, and you make it happen. You put your head down. And so I encounter so many men who are, for the first time in their life, being allowed to be in a space with another man and not have to prove anything or seem like they have their shit together, and they can actually lose control, I would say.
Yeah.
And that's always like in and of itself a really healing part of this for them. Is like, I had this conversation with one of my clients recently where he's worrying about like needing to show up to the time together with like a plan and like how we're going to do this. And I'm like, wait, that's my job. Like, you don't have to come with anything, and then you can be a wreck, and then let me support you in that. Like, that's where my skill set comes in. And so,
well, that's how he's solved all the problems his whole life, Addison.
Yep.
Having a plan. There was no room for feelings. I'm sure. Is he married, girlfriend, boyfriend, anything? Like,
married.
So like, he doesn't tolerate those emotions, has a hard time validating his wife's experience, yada, yada, blah. It's a playbook, boys. It's the same for fucking all of us, right?
It is the same.
So, it is the same. And that's why it's like funny to talk cultural considerations, Addison, but I don't know that it's like at large, I don't know that it's really much different anywhere else in the country. Sans pockets of the Northeast and the Pacific Northwest, maybe, but I'm not even sure about that as I get to know people more and more, that some of those thoughts that I would have had of like, oh, well, maybe the places where there's more resources, like, I don't know, man. It doesn't really feel like it. Addison, like this is, I feel like I fucking say shit ad nauseum on this podcast, which is fine because we all need to hear it. Men are not taught to self-advocate. You have talked about, like, you were like, this guy needs the license to come in here and, quote, lose control, which really would be like, speak up at fucking all. And it's like, I come to this over and over again, where like, if women are taught to sit down and shut up, well, then men must be taught to speak their mind. No one is taught to speak their mind. And that is the idea of like this grander society. It's like, none of us are really taught to speak our mind. And so self-advocacy is a problem for everybody. So the handful of people who are good at self-advocating tend to get all the power and all the money. And so, that is the grander, but this isn't political, Addison. It's not religious, nothing about that stuff. It's just a fact that the more people could speak up, the more they get their wheels greased. So I don't know. That's just what I was left with when you were talking about one of your guys. It's just like, mind-boggling.
Yeah, and this is what's so interesting to me is that actually takes up. So I feel like I have meet with so many guys who are like trying to not take up space in their relationship, which actually takes up a shit ton of space.
Yeah,
it takes up more space because it's and this is, I see this in relationship dynamics all the time, where you're just playing this guessing game, and there's no communication, and then no connection, no intimacy, nothing, and so. It actually, for the guys listening, actually takes up less space for you to advocate for yourself.
And just to say how you're feeling. I mean, like, I can speak for myself, and, I'm honest in this podcast about all the work I've had to do and my general baseline emotional avoidance. I can feel those moments from past romantic relationships where I haven't been able to talk and I've not been able to share how I was feeling. And like, let me tell you, it was the strongest badness. I could have been walking around the room punching shit and breaking shit, and it would have been better than saying nothing at all. And you just know that feeling. And I've been there, and I'm sure most men here in relationships have felt that way, which is like, if I say something, it'll make it worse. Or if I say something, or I'm not allowed to say, you get stuck in that, and it's worse than just fucking letting it out. Like you said, lose control, because at least you can do something with that. It's not a guessing game for your partner.
Try. And I know also people are like, well, I don't know what I'm actually feeling. And it's like, that's okay.
That is
Try
okay.
something. Try something.
And if we flip that coin, right, we talked about validation on this show. You are essentially guessing if you're validating somebody at the beginning, at least. Hey, Jenny, I can tell you're upset. I don't know if I know why, but my best sense is you didn't like how I responded to that question. Right. And then what's nice is when you've either validated correctly, like, yeah, I'm fucking angry, or you get, no, I'm not angry, you asshole, I'm fucking annoyed, or whatever. No matter what, if you're trying it, you usually get something.
Yeah.
And that something gives you a closer clue as to what's going on. So that idea of like, I don't know how I'm feeling. If you are the other person in this dynamic, try anyway. Try to name what they're feeling anyway. Because you're going to get information either way, because if you say the wrong thing, they're going to shut down more, and that's okay. We keep trying. Or you're going to hit the nail on the head, and they're probably going to have a little more of that. Well, I don't want to mention that my partner's sad, because then they're going to get more sad. And it's like, For a second, they will.
Yes.
For a minute, they will, because they will feel seen.
Mm-hmm.
Then you'll give them a hug, and they'll be happy that you understood them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the long run work, boys. That's the long run work.
And I think this plays, I use this in my own, with my partner. I try and like call out of her all of her anger at the end of all of our fights, because I don't want that shit to carry over into 4 hours later whenever we're cooking dinner.
Right.
And
Right.
it's resentment. And
Yeah.
so like that, I would also say, like, I think as men, how can we continue to make space for those emotions to be like brought out? Because then they're out there, and then we know what we're aiming at. And I know the typical dynamic of like, you know, there's a lot of things that your partner doesn't say, and then it turns into resentment, and it builds and builds. And I'm like, no, let's squash this now. Like, let's get this done.
Yeah.
Because I want to move free into the next, whatever we're doing next.
I think just men are taught so strongly to just not talk about it, get over it, move past it, put it behind us. And frankly, we all know that you can't just get over things that you put behind you. If it was big enough and important enough, you need to talk about it. And you're not going to be able to look the person square in the eyes if you're holding something that's fucking salty, right? So I think the tendency in men is to avoid so hard, and women too, but men we're talking about, and that's the big, you know, it just makes it impossible, which is not impossible, excuse me, it makes it very hard. So gents, if you're listening to this, and if you're in this far of the interview with me and Addison, you're open to this feedback, just ask what they need. Ask if this is what they're feeling. Again, validation isn't asking. You're like, I think you're feeling this. It seems like this. But if you don't know, you don't sound annoyed, you don't sound frustrated, and you're like, hey, friend, I am trying to understand what you need, and I don't know. And if the person says, I don't know what I need, that's fine. That means don't fucking do anything. Mm-hmm. Just sit there. If they're sad, be sad. If they need a hug, they need a hug. Don't get into man mode and be like, you don't know what you need? Good. Let me like tell you how to fix your problems, and let me like grab you. You get a cup of tea, you sit the fuck back down.
And here's the deal, like, what a permission to you. You don't have to do shit. You don't have to fix it. So it's actually like, it's a time where you get to be like, I only need to like listen. Okay, I can do that. This is weird, but this is kind of nice. Like, do it.
Yeah.
You don't have to fix it.
Yeah, that's funny. I like that. I don't think about it as like, it's a grace. If we're, again, using male with female partner or whatever, a male being the one who's supposed to be supportive, I'm giving you a break. You don't need to think. You need to think only as hard as what has been her experience, their experience. I talked on the podcast about the platinum rule versus the golden rule. So not treat people how you want to be treated, treat people how they want to be treated.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Which implies a whole nother level of skills. So most men listening to this, you probably are not very good at the platinum rule right now, and that is fine. I was not very good at the platinum rule up until I started all this work. Yeah. I was great at the golden rule.
Yeah.
But like, that's fine. It's simple. It's like, oh, cool. Don't be a dick. Got it.
Yeah.
But how everybody needs that to happen is different.
Totally different.
Yeah. Addison and I are trying to figure out a sports-based weekly segment.
We're both fascinated by people, right? That's clear. I'm fascinated by people. I know you are too. And there are a lot of people, particularly sports folks, who their lives are in some way really public, and there are certain decisions and actions and the way they operate and this and that. And it's interesting to me. I love kind of like not in a harmful way or like a cruel way, but dissecting and paying attention to, because I think there's value and there's lessons within that. And so I don't know, maybe that's something that we can.
To give the background here for talking sports with Shock and Solomon, or Shock and Solomon, you know, something. My concern, and I'm going to leave all this in, Addison, as a psychiatrist, we have a rule that's called the Goldwater rule. Barry Goldwater was a presidential candidate in the 80s. They did a magazine interview of 1,000 psychiatrists. Do you think he's fit to be president? And the APA, so the American Psychiatric Association, came out and said, no, we cannot comment on the fitness of a public figure. So the rule is, and I quote, It is unethical for a psychiatrist to offer a professional opinion unless he or she has conducted an examination and has granted proper authorization for such a statement. So, Addison and I want to talk about athletes on the air. I don't want to lose my license. Let's
I feel like in a very kind and very honest way, I can maybe speak to some of those things because I'm not going to lose a license. And it's not.
Yeah, that's right. What if
the goal is not to talk shit, right? That's not the goal.
Facilitating the interview, no. And I do think we'd be mostly praising
absolutely,
men, and so, all right. Well, have your agent call my agent, which means we'll touch base back on Instagram or our emails.
Deal.
Addison, where can the people find you?
Instagram, Addison Shock Coaching, website, Addison Shock Coaching. Yeah, those are the best two home bases to get a hold of me.
We'll include all that in the episode description. Bro, can't wait to get you out here to ski this winter. We are not that far away in spite of what the temperature is here in Denver and down in Birmingham. And good shit, man. Look forward to chopping it up again soon.
Thank you, brother.